Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Man Podcast. That's right, the Power Man Podcast, folks. My name is Rory Paquette, and I know you know that, but I am so incredibly grateful to be sitting here in this chair that I just want to make sure that I thank every one of you at the beginning of every episode. I've been doing it for almost 400 episodes now, and I'm going to keep doing it for the next 400. Folks, without you out there doing what you do, liking, sharing, subscribing, and sending me all of those colorful DMs, which I will get to. I promise I'm going to respond to every one of them personally. Folks, if you're not out there doing what you're doing, I don't get to sit here and do what I'm doing. So eternally grateful to every one of you. Now, if you're a friend of the program, you know what time it is. That's right. We got to pay a couple of bills. So we're going to have a sip of our preferred beverage. Man, that is just better every time I drink it, folks. You guys all know what we're drinking. That's right. It's Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Look them up. Check them out. Deep, dark, rich, bold, and beautiful. Just like my wife. Folks, they brew a mean cup of joe. I'm telling you right now, it's fantastic. And they do all the right things for all the right reasons, including supporting veterans, which you guys all know is incredibly important here at the Power Man Podcast. If you're a veteran out there, like our guest today, I want to thank you and your families for your service, because if you didn't do what you would go out and do all the time, then I wouldn't be able to sit here and say the stuff that I get to say. It would be illegal, and I would have been thrown off the air a long time ago. So thank you for that. Folks, we celebrate all of you, and I'm glad you found a home here at the Power Man Podcast. We love you. Folks, Freedom Hill Coffee feels the same way, and that's why we work with them. That's why we do what we do. Look them up and check them out on Instagram at Freedom Hill Coffee, and tell them Power Man sent you. Let me get one more sip of this before I dive into talking to this utterly dynamic individual I have on the podcast today. All right, here we go. Folks, this gentleman is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. He is also a best-selling author of the book, And Then They Prayed, which we're going to hear all about today. That's already fascinating. Folks, he's also a U.S. Congressman and from the state of Georgia. Please welcome Barry Loudermilk to the show. Congressman, how are you today?
Roy, I'm doing great. How are you doing? You thawing out? That's
I'm trying to thaw out exactly. Oh, my goodness. It is so cold here in Indiana. It's just insane. But you said you had some stuff in Georgia.
Yeah, we did. Fortunately, it wasn't as bad as predicted. You know, here we get where I live in Georgia, we get about one snow a year, and about every 2 or 3 years, it actually sticks for a while and stays around for a week or so. But what we're more prone to get is ice storms, and those can be much more devastating, not only for driving, but these pine trees, when they get the top of the pine trees get heavy with that ice, they just tend to snap off and hit power lines, houses, etc. But fortunately, by the grace of God, my area, we missed the worst of that. But it has been cold. I mean, when you get this humid cold that's in the teens, that's pretty frigid down here. So we're a little chilly, but we're doing well.
I'm glad to hear it. I tell you what, it's amazing what's happening all over the country right now. So, but you know what? We're here. We made it, and we're on board to talk about everything that you came here to talk about. I tell you what, I mentioned it to you in the pre-interview, folks. I could sit here and talk to this gentleman for at least an hour on 15 different topics, and probably have him on all 7 of my podcasts. You know, but today we really want to dive into a couple of different topics, and one of which is this book that you've written, because it raises some really incredible points that I think my listeners are really going to be interested to hear. Tell us about And Then They Prayed. You know, what is it? Why is it what it is?
Well, first of all, it's a book about history of the United States, but it's different than any other history book you've ever read. My dad was a World War II veteran. He was a medic in the European theater, was on the in the D-Day landing all the way through the Battle of the Bulge and into Germany. One of the most humble but wisest men that I ever knew. And as I was growing up, I was a latecomer. My brother and sister, 16, 17 years older than I am. So as I'm growing up, all of my friends, it was their grandfathers that were the World War II veterans. So I always run the bragging rights, okay? It was my dad that was a World War II veteran. But he used to tell me these incredible stories from American history that I never heard in school. I never learned anywhere else. And so, as my children were getting older, I started researching all these stories and sharing them with them. We homeschooled our kids, so that gave me a little advantage to make sure they got the right training
Yeah.
as far as our providential history. And I started being asked to speak at different places, especially after 9/11. You know, we had this surge in patriotism. People were getting their eyes back on our freedoms, our country, and God, and our rich heritage. So I started traveling around and speaking on various stories of divine intervention and prayer throughout American history. And everywhere I'd speak, people would say, "Can I get a copy of that?" And so my wife finally convinced me I've got to sit down and write a book on all these. But I didn't want to write it in a way that, people, as a documentary. I wanted to write it as a story. And so that takes a whole lot more research because let's take, for instance, George Washington at Valley Forge. That was one of the most inspirational stories that has really been a guiding direction in my life. But it's one thing to just tell what happened at Valley Forge. So you can go research George Washington, you can see what he said, what he did, letters he wrote. But if you want to put the reader there at Valley Forge, you have to research those that were around him and tell it from that third person perspective. And that takes a whole lot more research. So we took 10 years researching these
Wow.
stories that range from 1746 all the way up into the 20th century, the Apollo 8 space mission. And their story form, they're engaging, they're exciting. These are the comments we're getting from people who have been reading them. And they just tell not only the story of prayer and divine intervention, but also the character of those that were there, that when they were facing insurmountable odds, they had the courage to stand firm and turn their eyes to God and continue to stand for what was right. This is one thing that I've applied in my life is if you want to succeed and you want to fulfill God's will, keep your eye on your cause, not your circumstances. And that's what most of these stories are all about. What's interesting about it, and this is a copy of the book here, it does have the bestseller badge, which we had to add late last year because it became a #1 bestseller in several categories on Amazon.
Congratulations.
But
Yeah.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, it's just been a blessing of God to get that out there. When our pre-release copy came out, we released it on July 4th of this last year because of our 250th anniversary. I think it's important for people to get reunited with this incredible heritage of our country. I had a meeting with the president scheduled. I think it was the 1st of June. He had called and wanted me to come meet with him, and it was just he and I and a couple of his advisors from the White House meeting in the Oval Office. So as I'm leaving my office, I grab one of the first copies. I think it was the very first copy, the pre-release copy that we received. And I took it with me. And when I walked into the Oval Office, he was sitting behind the Resolute desk. He stood up and he said, Barry, come here. Let's get I'm not going to try to imitate the president. I can't do it like others can. He's like, come here, let's get a couple of photos before we start the meeting. So I went behind the desk with him, and the White House photographer came and was taking photos. And then I handed him that pre-release copy. And I said, Mr. President, he pulled out a pen like he was going to sign it. I'm like, no, this is for you, right? He thought I just wanted him to sign this book. I said, this is for you. And he opened up the cover, and I had inscribed on it, to my favorite president. Now, this is an inside joke because all the years I've been in Congress, if the president of the United States ever wants to have a conversation, there's this procedure they go through. So the White House Communications Office will contact my scheduler and say the president would like to have a phone call either in a few minutes, or they'll schedule a time. And then when that time comes, White House Communications will contact my office, and the person on the other end of the phone will say, I have a call from the president for Congressman Loudermilk. They'll get me on the phone, then they'll make the connection. That's the way it always happens. That's not the way it happens with this president. He has your cell phone number. He calls you from your cell phone number at any time of the day, and he always says, Barry, this is your favorite president. So with that, I inscribed on there to my favorite president.
Nice.
And I said, to someone who also has experienced an act of divine providence. When he read that, he got just the most serious look on his face, and he turned and he looked at me and he pointed to his right ear.
Yeah.
And if you remember the assassination attempt,
Oh yeah.
That bullet grazed his ear. He said, if God had not told me to turn around right then, Barry, I wouldn't be here today. So I knew he was getting it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I gave him the book, thinking he's going to go put it on a shelf somewhere with all the other memorabilia that he receives. But I was back over at the White House a couple of weeks later, and I wasn't meeting with the president then, but one of his aides came to me. He said, you know that book that you left the president? I said, yeah. He said, he's been reading it. He's kept it on his desk for 2 weeks. So in October, out of the blue, I had no idea this was coming. He sends out a true social endorsement of the book, and then they prayed. So, you know, he read it, he liked it, he endorsed it. So we had to go back to printing and we had Newt Gingrich's endorsement on the front of it. So we had to go back and put Donald Trump. And even though Newt is a good friend of mine, he got demoted to the back for this one. But
I'm sure Newt understands.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. But
Yeah.
This is, and this is the kind of impact that we would hope this book would have, because this is fact. No one can deny these, because there's a bibliography in the back where we list every source document. And I still get emotional about some of these stories. I mean, from 1746, even before we were still colonies then, God was intervening, all the way up into the Apollo 8 space mission. It's just where there was, a lot of people don't realize, that was the first time any human being left the gravitational field of the Earth, was Apollo 8. They were the first to leave and go, and they didn't land on the moon, but they orbited the moon. Right. And they were the first people to ever see an Earthrise, where the Earth actually came above the horizon of the moon. Their orbit was going to happen on Christmas Day. And the story is following the three astronauts, especially Frank Borman, who was the commander of the Apollo 8 space mission. And it's going through them preparing for this flight, and they're on the flight there. Now, if you think about what these guys are doing, that's pretty stressful, right? You're doing something nobody's ever done before. Oh, yeah. You're basically strapping yourself to the top of a bomb and getting hurled into space, right? Yeah. Going where you hope all these scientists and engineers got this stuff right, because they don't have the supercomputers that we have today. But of all that, the thing that stressed the commander the most was what he was going to say when they first orbited the moon on Christmas Day, because they knew that would be the most watched and listened to event in world history.
Wow.
And so without revealing the entire story, they basically read the first 12 verses of Genesis.
Nice.
And which was just incredible. And there were many other things. There was prayers that were recorded and played in churches as they were on their mission. I mean, these are things that people, they've lost connection with. And that's the most recent story we have in there. There's many more. We could probably write another book, and we may do that in the near future. Sure. About other acts of divine providence.
I love that that's what the book's about. I mean, honestly, because these are all true stories.
They are absolutely well documented. A great example is one from the Civil War that happened here in Georgia. And I'm excited about this because I can still go to this location. And people are probably familiar with the movie Andersonville, which was about one of the most horrific prisoner of war camps during the Civil War. They were all bad, but Andersonville was one of the worst. It was the Confederate prison camp where they held Union soldiers. Okay. It was way over capacity. I mean, like 3 or 4 times over the capacity of what it was built for. Soldiers were dying at the rate of 100 per day inside the stockade walls, mostly due to the lack of fresh water. The only water source they had was called Stockade Creek, and it ran through the center of the camp. And that basically became the latrine for all of them. And there was a saying within the prisoners is there's one way to escape from Andersonville, and that's to take a drink out of Stockade Creek, because they'll carry your body out within a few days. And that was hyperbole. That was the truth, right?
Yeah.
There was one soldier, a Union soldier from Indiana. His name was William Tannehill. He was a Christian. And he started having prayer services in an area they called the Tabernacle, which was basically at the base of a tree with the exposed roots. The tree had been blown over in a storm, and they would meet there and pray. And he called a prayer meeting one day, not for the end of the war, not for their release, not for escape, for the thing they needed the most, which was a source of fresh water. I mean, this is very well documented. They started praying, and they just didn't pray for an hour and quit. They kept praying, and their intent was they were going to pray until they got a source of fresh water. At one point, when they were praying, one of these South Georgia storms, thunderstorms that pop up, they're quite frequent. They'll come through. It'll rain. It'll be a torrential downpour for about 10, 15 minutes, and then they move on. Okay. Just enough to make the air more humid, right? And they can catch a little bit of water, but they were praying for a permanent solution. So they kept praying through the storm. And while they were praying, a lightning bolt struck inside the stockade wall. It hit the ground, and I'm not kidding. A spring of pure water erupted where the lightning hit. And that provided the source of fresh water for the remainder, all the way through the end of the Civil War. And you can go to the Andersonville. It's a National Historic Site now, run by the Park Service. You can go there today, and the Providence Spring, as it was aptly named, is still flowing today.
Oh my goodness!
I did a little. You can find it on our website, and then theyprayed.com. I did a video from there just last summer. Of course, it was blazing hot at that time, but this cool, fresh water is still flowing. There's a kind of a monument built right there, and they've run a pipe out and a little trough of marble that it flows through. And I mean, it's just incredible that you can go, and not only did that miracle happen and sustain them, it's still there as a monument to what happened then.
Neat. I mean, that's amazing. All those stories, where things happen out of nowhere and you just know God's hand's involved. Those are always fascinating. I'm curious. We spoke about it a little bit beforehand, but I really want to hear this part of the story, if you don't mind. Sounds like an incredible book. Sounds like something I'd love to read. Can't wait to. I think your wife's sending me a copy, actually.
She is, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. But why? Why write this book now and go out and do what you're doing with it? What's behind it? What are you hoping to accomplish?
Well, I think it's important for people to understand what has sustained us as a free people as a constitutional republic for 250 years. This is our 250th anniversary. Yeah. Even those who founded the country knew how volatile we were. And our country only exists based on the integrity of the people and those who are elected to abide by the Constitution and the laws that sustained us. And it's so easy to fall into the human nature of greed and self-promotion. And our founders understood that. And there is a foundation on which they built our entire constitutional republic, and it was upon those moral values taught by Jesus that have been held to through generations of understanding common law. And so, but they understood that all of that could fall apart at any moment if we lost that bearing as a country, and understood that it was simply by the grace of God that we were holding on and that we were ever established to start with, right? And so people have asked me quite often, as bad as things are in this country, and we see it every day. I mean, the violence is happening. Sometimes I think we look more like a third world country than we do the most powerful, most influential government in world history.
For sure. Yeah.
And part of that is because that's what the media is going to focus on, because people today, they want their emotions stimulated more than their thought provoked, right? And so I believe it's important that we understand our past. And people quite often, because I'm engaged in several investigations in Congress, they're like, why can't we just let these things go? Why can't we move on? And I'm like, because our past is so important, both our successes and failures. The book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 1, which was written 1,000 years before Christ, right? So that's quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
It tells us that everything that can happen has already happened. And this was back then. It says there's nothing new under the sun. What will happen has already happened. So if you want to know how to fix a situation or make it through a tough time, all you have to do is go back and look into the past and how that situation was addressed in the past. And so for us to move forward, it's important that we look back. And so I originally wrote this book back, I think it was in 2010, 2011,
Okay.
but and just released it as a self-published book, and we sold a few hundred. But God inspired me that now is the time people need to hear this. So we updated it now with a lot more access to libraries of Congress and the archives. I had more access to information online digitally, so we were able to update some of this. But we released it so people understand, because people ask me all the time, can we even survive as a country another year, 10 years, 20 years, or 250 years?
Right.
Yes, if we know what sustained us in the first 250. And that's really the purpose for writing the book.
Great answer. I love that. um, I think, with especially today with progressive sort of, running everything in the media, I think a lot of folks, even even folks who don't believe that way, I think a lot of folks have forgotten the role that faith and everything else has, the role it took in founding the country in the first place.
Absolutely. I did a seminar series back in 2009, 2010 called The Foundations of Freedom. And that's where we break down our founding documents as to where did the inspiration for these lines and phrases within our founding documents come from. And the University of Houston did this same study, a more in-depth study of I think they looked at 14,000 letters, documents, writings of founders of our country and influencers during that time. And they wanted to know what was the source of their inspiration. Their report, and this is the University of Houston just doing a secular report study, came out and said over 84% of their beliefs and statements came directly from the scriptures. And those that didn't came from people like John Locke and Sir William Blackstone, who were Christian jurists during the time who had a significant influence on representative republics. And so as they came out, the overwhelming majority in the 90 percentile range was directly or indirectly from the scriptures. And so they just didn't talk about it. They believed it. And so even people that today we consider deist, like Benjamin Franklin, during the Constitutional Convention, was one of the stories in the book. During the fifth week of the Constitutional Convention, literally the entire convention was on the verge of collapsing because of the differences between the small states and large states, agricultural versus industrial states.
Wow.
And so it was over representation, and they were fighting for the crown. And even got to a point where one of the smaller states threatened to realign with England. I mean, we had just spent 8 years in war with England for independence. Benjamin Franklin understood the severity of that situation, and he stood up and gave a speech. Now, you can Google this, you can find it anywhere, except for in public schools. His speech was, how is it that we have been here 4 or 5 weeks and have yet to ask for the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding? I mean, he started chastising him. He said, during our war for independence, we gathered in this very room, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said, we gathered in this room and daily sought guidance from God, and we saw multiple times of his divine providence. And they're just talking like, hey, we know this, we've seen it, and why have we not prayed yet here? And so they recessed, And they decide that there was a motion on the floor that they bring in a member of the clergy to come in and start every session in prayer. So they debated that, and part of the problem was they didn't have any money to pay a member of the clergy to come in, right? We had no treasury at the time.
Yeah.
So they decided, then let's just all go to church. So they all went to church on July the 4th. And the the pastor preached a message on unity. They all went back, and there's journals, and we reference some of these statements in the book, is that a new spirit of cooperation fell upon everyone there. And as a result was the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, this is Benjamin Franklin. Today, people will say this guy's a deist. He doesn't believe that God directly intervenes with men, but that is exactly the opposite of what he said in his speech. He said, "If how can a sparrow fall to the ground without him taking notice?" Right? If that's the case, how can an empire rise without his assistance? I mean, he understood this personal relationship with God. And what's interesting, and another reason that I think is important for people to read this book, is George Washington, and this is in the introduction to the book, this story, his first act as the first president of the United States was to declare a national day of thanksgiving and prayer, specifically for the many acts of divine providence as a result of prayer that we experienced during our war for independence.
Wow. I mean, there you go. I appreciate that. Another great answer. I appreciate that. You brought up public schools, in your answer before. You and I talked about homeschooling, a little bit. I totally understand that. Putting this book out now, and the schools reminded me of this. Putting this book out now, I'm guessing that you met with just a little bit of resistance to putting out this message, especially from your position, given the temperature of things. Would that be a fair statement?
It is. I mean, but it's a lot less than what we anticipated. And I think the reason is because it's so well documented. Okay. I didn't just want to write a story and, somebody be able to go in there and pick it apart.
I
Right.
see.
So we were very careful when writing these stories that we stayed extremely accurate, and we had a bibliography with every publication, every piece of research. I didn't just want to go to what somebody said that Thomas Jefferson said. I wanted to go see it in his own handwriting, right? So there's plenty of other stories I could get right in here that I believe are true, but it was this person said that Thomas Jefferson said this, or this person,
Hmm.
documented this. But we wanted to stay with the source of people who were there. I'll give you one instance um, that is that's relative to the importance of understanding the book, and it's something I'll probably put in a future book. But at the Second Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia in 1776, they were debating this idea of separating from England. And they understood just how important this was. And I encourage people, I'm not a big fan of HBO, but if you watch the John Adams series that HBO put out a few years ago, I'm a big fan of that. In the second episode portrays this moment when they all voted to adopt, to separate from England. And what you would think is as soon as it passed, they would all cheer. They would, stand up and be all excited. They portrayed exactly the way it was. It was like the seriousness of the moment overfell everyone, and they just sat quietly because they knew they just declared war on the most powerful military force in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Now, they did not, I mean, success was almost impossible, right? This is a perfect example of getting your eyes on your cause, not your circumstance. Well, John Adams, he was very pro independence. I mean, he gave some incredible speeches. But there was a gentleman by the name of John Dickinson who was a patriot, but he was also a realist, right? He understood the danger of what was about to take place. And so he gave a speech that has been titled the Doomsday of America, which is a term he used in there, is that if we do this, we will actually be writing a book of the dooming of the entire America colonies. And he said that, he had studied any other culture that had tried to stand against England and what happened to them. And I mean, he was just telling about how our towns would be ravaged and our women and children kidnapped and all of this. Well, as he's given that speech, a delegate named John Dickinson, who was also from, I mean, Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush was the
Okay.
delegate listening to Dickinson give the speech. He was also from Pennsylvania. He leaned over to John Adams, and this was written in his journal, Benjamin Rush's journal. He said, I leaned over to John Adams and I said, do you believe we will succeed in our quest for independence? And John Adams responded, yes, if we ask forgiveness of our sins and pray. I mean, he was citing 2 Chronicles 7:14 at that point. And so that shows the illustration of how important scriptures were to these people. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, in the last line of the Declaration of Independence, illustrates that they understood what they were trying to do was impossible, because he wrote in support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's the last lines in the Declaration. And what he's saying is, we know what we're doing is impossible, but we have our eyes on our cause, not on our circumstance, and we believe that God will sustain us. But if he doesn't, we're still going to dedicate everything we had. Jefferson was asked years later, what was the inspiration for that line? And he said it was a story in the book of Daniel of the three Hebrew children, where they were going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. And they basically said, we believe God is going to save us, but if not, we still won't bow. And that was the inspiration.
My goodness. Okay. I mean, I love your answers. I really do. I love everything you put into this book. This is very consistent for you, from what I've been able to kind of research and find out. This isn't, you're not someone who just woke up to Jesus yesterday. I mean, this has been part of your makeup your entire career and since long before that, right?
Oh, unfortunately, that's not Freedom Hill, but if I'll definitely be looking into it.
Well, you got
But
to have your coffee when you got to have your coffee.
you do, and talking as much as I tend to do sometimes dries out the throat. Um, yeah, I mean, growing up in a Christian household, I learned from my dad and my mom just to keep your eyes on your cause, not your circumstance. But
Right.
I've actually God has, and a lot of people have trouble understanding why I say this, but that God has allowed us to go through potentially more trials and tribulations and tragedies than most people will ever experience in a lifetime. I mean, still just some of them, or just one of them, is greater than what most people will ever experience in a lifetime. And I say that because I think part of this book was preparing me and my family for the tragedies that we would face. Um, I mean, my life story, and we're actually working on a book right now about facing these trials and tribulations.
Hmm.
Hopefully, coming out later this year. This is we're shopping it out to publishers right now. But this this keeping your eye on your cause, not your circumstances, is much more applicable to my life than just words in a book. My life story almost reads like a Tom Clancy and John Grisham novel combined. Uh, Domestic terrorist attacks, shootings, assassination
Yeah.
attempts, car wrecks, train wrecks. I mean, we've seen a whole gamut of it. And not only did God sustain us through all these things, but I was able to learn. The book of Romans tells us that to take joy in our tribulation, because going through these things gives you experience and teaches you perseverance and ultimately builds your faith. Because every time you go through one thing, the next thing may be worse, but God sustained you during the first thing. I was in June 14th, 2017. I was playing on the congressional baseball team, and
Right.
we were at our last practice. And at about 7:05 in the morning, a domestic terrorist came up and started firing, shooting at
Right.
us on the field. I ended up having over 22 shots fired at me directly. But I had to make a decision as I ran off the field and took cover behind a shed. My military training kicked in. I was being ambushed, and so I had to immediately just started thinking. My mind almost was running like a supercomputer. I never got scared. It was an interesting thing. Just my literally, people say in times like this, time slows down. I think
Sure.
what really happens is your brain just goes into this overload mode. And I was literally, as I'm running and the ground is erupting around me with bullets hitting, I'm analyzing the trajectory and the bullet. And it's just, unless you've been through that, it's hard to explain what was happening.
Yeah.
And I immediately remembered that when you're under an ambush, seek cover. If you locate the aggressor, if you have means of fighting back, fight back. If you don't, plan a route of escape to safety. So as I'm running off the field, I'm going to plan this route of safety, and literally as
Sure.
bullets are whizzing by me. As I get to the back of a shed, and I need to locate where the shooter is because he was originally down on the third base side. I was standing at home plate when he started shooting. I couldn't see him; he was behind a dugout. Um, I'm anticipating he's trying to get on the field. So I get out on the first base side. I'm on the side of this building that was about 30 feet off the first base gate. And so I go up to the front of the shed to try to locate the shooter. Another individual comes around with me, one of the assistant coaches. And as I'm going around, I see one of the other assistant coaches walk around the other side and fall down. And he's totally covered in blood. A bullet
Oh
had
man.
entered his back and came out his chest. And I had to make a decision at that moment. Do I continue with my plan to seek cover or do I stay? And I had to make that instant decision, which I decided to stay. And so that put me in the line of fire. And literally, I know what Donald Trump heard when that bullet went by his ear because I heard the same thing then.
Yeah.
But 22 rounds shot at me during that entire period. Not one struck. I know that was a hand of God, but what I learned through that um, helped me in other situations going forward. Everything from, just seeing the miracles that God had, dealing with high stress environment, but also dealing with PTS. That was I'm one of those that denied I had it, but I'm walking down the street and car backfires and I'm diving in the bushes, type thing. So,
Sure. Yeah.
um, but what was interesting and what this other book is going to cover is God prepared me for that 30 years or 20 something years earlier. I was living in Alaska at the time. My dad was 70 years old, the World War II veteran, and he had a dream of doing this 27-mile backcountry Alaska hike. I mean, this is pure wilderness, Alaska, rugged. He's 70 years old. It's been a dream of his, so I want to fulfill his dream. And we decided to take 3 days to do this backcountry hike. I mean, we're climbing. I think in the first mile and a half or 2 miles, we climbed over 3,500 feet. It was 70 degrees at the base of the mountain. We were in waist deep snow at the top. We crossed over the pass. We're crossing an ice field that's hanging on the side of a mountain, and he slips down into a crevasse and basically tears his knee apart. I mean,
Hmm.
every ligament tendon was torn. So it ended up being 48 hours of survival. And so we end up, because of where we were, it was better to continue the 20 miles slightly downhill than it was to go the 7 miles back from where we started because it was such rugged terrain. So he decided we're going to continue on and try to get out on the other side because of a little bit better trail conditions. On the evening of the second day, my dad starts trying to convince me I have to leave him and go get help. Um, and so I'm struggling with this because I'd always been taught you never leave your buddy behind, right?
Right.
But he is adamant that he wants me to go. And as it turned out, it was not concern for himself as much as it was for my mother because she had had a massive heart attack
Oh, geez.
a few years earlier. And she was a worrywart to start with, but he knew the stress if she learned he was hurt, the stress of that could be devastating to her. Earlier that day, we happened across two other hikers. And so I gave them my wife's phone number and I said, we need help. If you can call and at least tell my wife what's happened and let authorities know. So my dad knew that word may have reached my mom. And so he was so concerned about her health, he wanted me to leave him. And now it's already getting dark.
Yeah.
But I go through it in the book. I go through an entire chapter of just the internal struggle with myself to make that decision of whether to stay with my dad or go ahead and go to the end of the trail, go to a payphone, call my mom, and then call for assistance. And I probably struggled with that for a half hour. But God led me to make the decision, and he taught me once you determine what is right, then you commit to it and act. You don't second guess yourself. Do what is right. And doing what is right is not always easy,
Right.
convenient, or popular. But I made the decision that I needed to go ahead and leave my dad. And there were several things happened to me and my dad in that time period, but I understood that scripture, and one of the things that helped me to make that decision was that Jesus is always with us. He says, I will never leave you or forsake you, right? And so I'm struggling with that. And then I realized, well, that is meant for my dad as well. So I won't be leaving him alone. And in fact, when I decided that I would do it, when I left my dad, I could hear him singing Amazing Grace as I was walking away. We had encountered some bears, and I think it was partly just making noise for the bears, but it was also kind of a prayer.
Right.
Well, 24 years later, I'm in a similar life or death situation, and I have to make a decision to go or stay. But I don't have a half hour to make that decision. But because God had put me in that place earlier, immediately my thoughts went back to that time period. And this is, in fact, during the baseball shooting, that was the second time this phenomenon of your mind being a supercomputer had happened, because on the trail we got charged by a bear. And when that bear was charging, my mind kicked into that same process. That's the first time it had ever happened in my life, is that I was not scared, but I was analyzing every step of that bear. And so this is kind of where I've learned that God has purpose in our lives, right? And God's called us for a purpose, a life of purpose, not necessarily a life of ease. And if you're going to fulfill that purpose, then you have to go through training. It's almost like going through boot camp, right?
Right.
That's tough. It's not fun, but it's preparing you for things that may be worse. And it's literally this having a life of purpose. In the book of Peter, it says, Paul writes to Peter, join me in the difficulties of being a good soldier for Christ, right? We know that there's difficulties, but you also know who will sustain you through them.
Sure. My goodness. Well, I mean, you've got quite a bit to fill up that second book. Just from the things that I already knew about you, of course, and that I've, read about you since you and I first connected. There was the baseball game, of course, which I did know about. That was stunning back then, especially because it was out of the blue. No one had ever seen anything like that happen before. If that were to happen today, for instance, it seems like it almost would have been like not even the top level news story of what goes on, because it's become so normal. How has that happened? And does that have something to do with the fact that so many people have been trying to move away from God?
Well, I think that's a big part of it, but it's also the mainstream news media. Back when this happened, it was covered by several major media outlets, but it quickly went away. It isn't something, there's other mass shootings that people still reference today. In fact, I was asked to come speak at several churches afterwards, because it's an interesting testimony.
Sure.
And quite often I would speak in a church and people would come up and say, okay, when did this happen? This baseball shooting? And this was within the year of it happening, and just people weren't aware of it. But you could bring up some other actions. I mean, there's some things that happened in the last couple of weeks, and you know, people are going to be talking about it.
Right.
There is definitely a bias in the mainstream media. You look at part of this story that a lot of people don't realize. You know, there were several casualties on our side that we had 4 or 5 people hospitalized from bullet wounds.
Hmm.
The perpetrator, he died on the way to the hospital after police took him down. But um, as soon as the shooting was ended and the victims were taken to the hospital, one Steve Scalise, our majority whip, he was medevaced. Park Police helicopter came in, picked him up, took him to the hospital. The guy I was with, ambulance took him. And once everybody was taken care of, all of us gathered on this outdoor basketball court and we prayed. That was the first reaction of everyone there. We found out later because the Democrats, the baseball team is, we play one game a year. It's Republicans versus Democrats. It's a
Right.
charity game.
Yeah.
The Democrats were practicing at the same time. While they're practicing, this whole team of Capitol Police SWAT officers shows up and provides protection for them, right? Because there's a perceived threat out there. That's when they found out what happened to us. They all gathered and prayed as well. And but there is definitely a bias within mainstream media, and because this, and this is my opinion, I think we can back it up, because it was conservative Republicans, it just wasn't given that same level of tragedy
Yeah.
within the media as you would see for lesser actions that happen today.
Right. For sure. I appreciate you taking that question, and I certainly didn't mean to be insensitive by that or anything.
No,
But
no, not
it
at all.
I mentioned, that I was going to be, have the honor of interviewing you, and to one of my sons, and I mentioned you had been through that, and in his total innocence of being 21 years old, he said, "Wait, what baseball game?" And
Yeah.
I was like, that kind of told the story, and I'm like, I failed as a father that I have not explained some of these things. In addition to the things that are very well known, though, I was very, very surprised to hear about some of the other stuff that you've had to deal with, just because of your beliefs and the side of the aisle you're on and so on. You and your wife both
Right.
were targeted. I mean, if you don't want to talk
Yeah.
about that, I mean, just say
No,
pass. We'll move
that's
on.
fine.
But
I mean, during my time in Congress, I've dealt with several death threats. But this one was again out of the blue. Now, this was a couple of months after the baseball shooting, and it was September the 12th. I'm going to back up a little bit from the assassination attempt.
okay,
On September the 12th, we were driving to D.C. from our home in Georgia, and we got a late start, decided to drive part of the way, spend the night, and then drive on in. As we were on the interstate around midnight, getting ready to just pull off to a hotel, someone slammed in the back of our car running 110 miles an hour. It lifted the rear end up, turned it sideways, and we started flipping over and over down the interstate, between 3 and 5 times. Um, by all accounts, we shouldn't have survived, but by God's protection, we did. Of course, when they got us out of the car, rushed us to the hospital, my wife had fractured her sternum. I had several external and some internal injuries. Nothing life-threatening, thank God. But my son and my director of security drove to pick us up. We were near Knoxville when this happened. So the car was totaled. The FBI investigated it as a potential target because of it looked like from the looks of the guy that hit us, it looked like it was potentially a pit maneuver. They could never find anything substantive to them. Well, they were concerned.
okay,
So we come back home, and we are basically stuck in our house because of recovering from our injuries. And 2 weeks later, my wife's a little stir crazy. Let's just go for a drive in the North Georgia mountains. And so we actually had my daughter's car at the time. It was a smaller car, and we had an SUV, but she was borrowing it, so we just had this little Toyota, and we're driving up a divided 4 lane when my wife and I hear something hit the back of the car. look, I'm that kind of guy that if she hears something in the middle of the night, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, hey, that's just the wind, right? As long as I don't have to get out of the bed to go check on it, if I can convince her it's
Right.
just the wind. So I'm like, it's probably just, rock off the road. And she said, rocks don't hit the back of the car. I hate it when they make sense like that, right? And so I
Sure.
don't pull off, which I think was providential at the time. I don't pull off, but later we found a bullet embedded in the back of the car. The FBI came and investigated, did their ballistics, and they opened the investigation as an attempted assassination on a federal official. The ballistics showed the bullet was fired from kind of a lower angle. They believe that the person was laying prone on the side of the highway waiting for us to come by. And it was directed toward the headrest of the driver, my side, but the elevation was off. The markings on the round indicated that it was shot through a gun with a silencer and was predominant. It was probably subsonic, which is the mark of a professional hit.
Absolutely.
And
My
so
goodness.
that had a huge impact on us because, look, I've been through the baseball shooting, and I was targeted because I was a member of a group, right? I was a Republican member of Congress, and the guy who was out, and he had a hit list in the pocket of his coat they found. He was
Hmm.
there to kill Republican members of Congress.
Right.
So I was targeted as part of a group. Um, this time it's personal. And I
Yeah.
mean, this is probably the most stressful event I've been through at the time is I'm literally mowing my grass with a sidearm attached to my hip, right? And so that was, and it was targeting both of us. The interesting thing is we're trying to figure out how did they know where we were going because this was a spur of a moment thing. It was just we decided to go. We like told my oldest son as we're going out of town just to let him know, hey, we're just going to go up here for the day. So no one knew. But as they were investigating it, the House Sergeant at Arms and Capitol Police took our phones to do a forensic examination of it, and they found out that my wife's phone had been hacked by a user, and so they were probably tracking where we were going. The backstory to that, which is interesting, is I give tours of the Capitol. That's one of my more favorite things to do. Constituents come, we'll give them evening tours of the Capitol and even show them interesting things that your regular tourists don't get. But there is a set of steps that are bloodstained. And it was from a shooting in the Capitol that happened in 1879, I believe it was. And it was a former member of Congress who was there. He had there was bad blood between him and a reporter. And the reporter's name was Charlie Kincaid. And they had words on the second floor of the Capitol. And Charlie Kincaid felt he was threatened. And so he went to his briefcase, got a gun, and knew where the congressman was going. He was making his way to the cafeteria there in the Capitol, and he was waiting on him at the base of the steps. And so when the congressman was coming down, he pulled a gun, he shot him in the chest. And the reporter's name was Charlie Kincaid.
Yeah.
The email address of the person who hacked my wife's phone was a Gmail account with the name Charlie Kincaid.
Oh, geez.
And so when the FBI looked at that, they're like, okay, this is either someone who knows you tell of that story, the history, and they're trying to make a statement, or is someone who's been able to access somebody. And so that was, we go into a lot more detail about that in the book, but this was, within a couple of months of the baseball shooting. It was a couple of months after that we were in a train wreck. I mean, not just the regular train wrecks you see in the Capitol, the
Yeah.
proverbial train wrecks, but this was a literal train wreck, a derailment. There was a fatality there. And so, we were going through this series of trials and tribulations, just trying to figure out what's going on. And I remembered when we were sitting on the side of the interstate after the multiple rollover car wreck, and we're waiting on the ambulance. My wife looks at me and she said, this is for a purpose. And I'm like, I believe it is. Maybe we're not supposed to know what the purpose is, but we just have to keep our eyes on our cause. So,
Wow. I mean, I got to say something. Kudos to your wife. because
Yeah.
there's a lot of wives who would have been like, okay, either you're not running again, or I'm out of here.
Well,
So,
she's been a real trooper, and because we share this common goal, and
uh,
she's intricately involved in even my work in Congress. She has a little desk in my office there where she helps with editing. I mean, it's just a volunteer position, but also here at home, involved in our writing and helping me with the books and
yeah.
everything. Because yeah, well, this is what we believe our calling is.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I had an opportunity to go back and forth with her a little bit, and yeah, she seems amazing. So, congratulations on that. You mentioned the Capitol steps towards the Capitol, the whole nine yards. Of course, that's kind of a great segue to the one other thing I really wanted to make sure I brought up. You're involved now in some sort of investigation into the January 6th. How do we want to label it? Gathering, setup,
Yeah.
scenario? Yeah, I mean, whatever,
I just call it the events of get January 6th.
event. Okay, there you go. That's
Yeah.
that's nice. What are you doing there, and why? And what have you found out that you can share with anybody?
Yeah, well, that's what I do most of my interviews on. In fact, I had one yesterday with news media outlet on the investigation, but that actually ties back into a lot of these other things that had happened to us.
Yeah.
Um, on probably the most stressful and fearful things that has ever happened to me happened within the weeks following January 6th. And that was when the former select committee on January 6th falsely accused me of uh, being a traitor to the country, claiming that I gave reconnaissance tours of the Capitol the day before. It wasn't true at all. I mean, there was nothing to it.
I
Even
remember
the
that.
Capitol
Yeah.
Police investigated it, and they said there was nothing to it, but the story was way too convenient to them.
Wow.
They didn't let the truth get in the way. Um, in that week, we received 200 credible death threats when they made, or in that period of a couple of weeks. Um, the threats against us were so serious, we had to have the police taking us to the airport from my office, escorting us to the plane. Um, that's that's the most stressful thing we've ever been through in our lives. But I had learned you don't look at your circumstances, you look at your cause, and decided we're going to fight back because the truth needs to be known. I
Right.
mean, it was absolutely nothing to their accusation. Now, we fought back, and as God's providence would have it, when Republicans took control of the House again, we elected Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. Kevin calls me into his office and he says, "I've got a task for you. I want you to chair an investigative committee that you're looking into the true events of January 6th, as well as the select committee on January 6th." And I mean, it shocked me. I'm like, okay, you understand what you're doing because the media is going to have a field day with this, saying all I'm going to do is go, try to vindicate myself. And I said, do you really want to deal with that? He said, that's the reason I'm putting you on there, because you know how they manipulated evidence, how they lied.
Yeah.
And if you can go and uncover what they did there, you can see what they did to everyone else. And as within the first month or two, we obtained what we thought was all of the documents from the previous committee. As it turned out, there was a lot missing. But we found the folder of the investigation they did on the people that came to visit us. So it was a group from Georgia that came to visit me the day before, and they came in my office. We took them to lunch at the cafeteria in the Capitol, which is open to the public, by the way, and just took them in the House office buildings. Never took them in the Capitol because of COVID restrictions, the Capitol was closed to visitors. And they just hung around with us for a while, and they left. There was nothing to it. But the January 6th Select Committee wanted to make an issue out of that, so they manipulated video evidence and several other things, um, and made the accusation. Well, when I found the documentation, I started looking at it. They subpoenaed two of the people that was with us. They got their phone records. They got all the video and pictures off their phone. It was a huge. It was unbelievably intrusive into their privacy. But they were subpoenaed by the committee. They were interviewed. They were deposed. They did extensive research and investigation into all these people. A month before they made the accusation, they knew that there was nothing to it. Okay, so they a month ahead, they knew there was nothing to their accusation, but they went ahead with it. And I ended up interviewing someone who was a contractor with the select committee. And we were talking, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I just want to tell you, I was in the room when they brought your case up, and the attorneys and the investigators said, there's nothing to it. You need to drop it. But the politicians on the committee was like, no, this is too good of a story. And so they proceeded with it, knowing that it was false. And so um, as a result of that, we closed the books on that story. Of course, we held a press conference and we invited all the mainstream media because I had the receipts, right? I had the documents, I had videos, I had all this evidence. So we held this press conference. They come in and they're all aghast. I mean, they're just like, oh, wow. They realize they had been lied to, but none of them ran the story. It was just amazing.
Oh
So
my
I
gosh.
told my staff, I'm like, guys, we know we were successful when they ignore it because they're
Right.
not going to let it out. But we continued that investigation. We uncovered several things. One, a lot of documents were missing. We started finding out and started some of these are House documents. By law, the House is to maintain those.
Sure.
But we found out that there were depositions of White House employees that we did not have archived. The Secret Service agents that were involved in everything from the pipe bombs to the accusations against President Trump that he tried to take control of the limo. If you remember
I
that,
remember
that
that
was
story. Yeah.
and that he was so mad he threw a cheeseburger against the wall in the Oval Office. I mean, there was all kind of stories that erupted from that. But we started finding that those testimonies of people who were with him that day were missing. And so we started researching. We found that some of them had been sent to the White House to archive. Now, that's a problem because of executive privilege, right? If we had not caught those documents before they were sent to the National Archives, we would not have been able to access them.
Yeah.
But we found those. We found Secret Service documents. We also found 40-something depositions by Department of Defense officials regarding the delay in having the National Guard respond. And in all the cases, the missing documents were documents that would have exonerated people who had been accused of things. And so basically we saw this pattern. If they interviewed someone and the person didn't say what they wanted to hear that didn't fit their predetermined narrative, those documents would disappear. There's still documents we haven't recovered. We hired a forensics team to do low-level scrubbing of hard drives, and we found 1,100 deleted documents. Some of those you understand, if you got duplicates, you delete them, but there was a couple of hundred that were unique and password protected that we still haven't been able to get into. But we've recovered enough to realize that and have proven the select committee was not after the truth. They basically, their objective was to make sure Donald Trump never ran for political office again.
Right.
And that anyone that just did not denounce President Trump, they were going to take down politically as well. And so I had told the speaker when he wanted me to run this committee, I said, I'm going to do it just under a few conditions. One, that I be given the resources and the funding and the autonomy to run an honest investigation without political bias, just to find the truth and to make the truth available to the American people. And he said, that's exactly what I want you to do. And that's what we've been doing. And because what we're finding, the facts that we're finding, run against the political narrative of the mainstream media, they all, come out and say, oh, you're just trying to rewrite history. No, I have the documents. This is history. And it's a lot like this. What people will say, oh, you're rewriting history. No, this is true history right here. It's
Right.
documented. You can see it. And, it boils down to what do people want to believe?
Yeah. For sure. I appreciate you answering those questions too. And I know you do get to talk about January 6th a lot. So I didn't want to have this whole episode be about that for you. I wanted to cover some other things you don't get to talk about a lot. And I think that's kind of where this question comes from as we, kind of start bringing this to a close, because I know you're busy as all get out, and I appreciate you giving us the time today. But I've always wanted to ask a sitting politician, okay, from this level. I've always wanted to ask this question. And maybe it goes back to your faith, but I'll let you go wherever you want with this, all right, and take your time. How in the world do you sit in a room across from people who view it as their mission to literally gin up the public to try to kill you?
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm exaggerating in this sense, but I just personally, I don't know how I could ever sit in a room with these people civilly when everybody knows that's the impact it's having. How do you do that, sir?
It's very difficult because one of the things that was infuriating to me when the false accusations were made against me is that affected my entire family. I mean,
Yeah.
people wanted to kill not only me, my children, my wife. They were all threatened, as well as staff members. And people don't think about the the words they're using and how in this volatile environment we are. When you go out and you call someone a Nazi without any justification, you just use it, or a racist or a bigot, or they are a threat to democracy. People who are already emotionally volatile
Yeah.
and they're afraid for their country, they then take that as justification to act out. And it's also infuriating when you see like what has happened to my wife and I, and we still get threats now. And we take them all very seriously. But even when action is taken against somebody like me, it's just kind of brushed off. But then you see what happened to Omar, where a guy, stands up and sprays her with apple cider vinegar during a town hall.
Hmm.
That is just like the worst thing that could ever happen. And so what's and I don't know that they'll learn from those types of things that and this is my both of my sons are have been licensed in executive protection and security services, and I've always had directors of security that have taught me that the greatest security risk to an individual is generally that individual. What you say and what you do. Do you put yourself in a situation? But also in this situation, it's these colleagues of mine. They're not thinking of what they're doing to the safety and security of others, because it does. And in fact, the guy that came to the baseball field and started shooting, he was radicalized by Senator Bernie Sanders. He really believed that Trump was destroying the country, and this was during the debate over repealing Obamacare, right? They had convinced him that he was going to lose his health care and that Trump was trying to kill him because of that. So he turned violent, and we've had that here in my hometown of people believing the same thing and making threats against us. So it's it's politics, and it's on both sides of the aisle too, because I think social media is part of the problem. Is that, and it's not social media; it's that we have been accustomed to being overly sensationalized, right? And some of the politicians realize this, and they think success to them is how many clicks, likes, or how viral a video goes, versus what are you doing to preserve the freedom of our country. I've told people in the past that success in Congress, unfortunately, is not measured by achievement, but measured by volume.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm surprised by your answer at all, because just getting to know you a little bit here, I think you're giving your colleagues an immense amount of grace with your
I am.
answer. So I would love to believe that they just don't understand what they're doing, but
Well, I think
you're
there's an
more forgiving
element.
than I am.
I think there's an element that they do, But as long as it doesn't affect them and it affects the people on the other side, then it's a
Yeah.
political victory because that's what they're looking at.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in Congress and many governments today, it's not about what's being achieved, but it's about who's in power.
Yeah. I understand. Congressman, I got to say, I've always been impressed by you, but I'm even more impressed now by who you are. I haven't had a chance to talk to you,
Thank you.
so that's one of the wonderful things about doing what I do for a living is getting to talk to people like this. So I appreciate you being as open as you have and sharing with us everything that you have. As we wrap this up, let me just ask you: is there anything that I didn't ask you? Is there anything that maybe we talked about and you want to double down on? Or is there anything that you just want to make sure you get out there? Maybe a final message to our folks who are listening today.
Well, Roy, I just appreciate the time being on the show, and I appreciate what you do. I mean,
Thank you.
the nice part of the technology is there are other outlets that aren't just the three-letter networks, right?
Right.
Where you can get the truth out that's unfiltered, and I appreciate you taking time. And again, I'll tell people once again, and then they prayed. This is please, if we've had churches actually use this as Sunday school guides, and ministers have preached sermons from it. Political leaders are using it. And this is, if you've never read a book about America's history, please get this one. You can go to my website, barryloudermilk.com, or the book website, and then they prayed. Of course, it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart. You can find it just about any retailer. But again, especially in the 250th anniversary of our country, my goal is to see that we go another 250 years. And I think this is a good guide.
There you go. Wonderful closeout. I appreciate that, sir. Yeah, folks, the author, best-selling author of And Then They Prayed, veteran and U.S. Congressman from Georgia, Congressman Barry Loudermilk. Sir, I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the show
Thank you,
and for
Roy.
everything that you do every day.
All right. We appreciate you too.
Absolutely. Folks, this has been another just incredible episode of the Power Man podcast. And the reason we have such powerful men come on here with these powerful messages is because we are absolutely united in hoping that you are able to find your power so that you can be a better provider, a better protector, a better leader tomorrow than you are today, so that you become a better father, a better husband, a better man tomorrow than you are today. And the reason that we want that for you is because you matter. It's because you have value, and it's because you're worth it. And at some point, you just have to believe it. Until next time.